I'm Jaki Shelton Green. I'm currently serving as the Poet Laureate of North Carolina. I grew up in North Carolina. I have lived here most of my life, except for living in New England and out of the country. I met Victoria and her husband and her two sons several years ago, perhaps 2018. I think it was 2018, when a mutual friend was doing a celebration of art downtown Durham at one of the hotels. And her son walked up to me and said, "Hello, my name is Langston. What is your name?" And it was love at first sight for this young family. And it was also just very joyful for me to witness a young African-American family who were bringing their children into the midst of creative makers, and especially creative makers who are people of color. So here were these two kids on a Sunday night. I won't say a very, very adult affair, but it was definitely an adult affair. And it reminded me of my young days as a parent and living in New England, and our children going to all kinds of cultural programs, because that experience that you start children with very, very young is what creates the foundation for who they can imagine themselves to be going forth. She told me all about Liberation Bookstore, and of course I went to her website and was just blown away by, oh my gosh, by the diversity, the variety, and the depth of the collections that she had been able to amass and bring into one warehouse, so to speak. And I'm not using warehouse in terms of a structure, but to have them in this one place. Accessibility is everything, and accessibility matters. So I am very, very impressed by what Liberation Station stands for and what it has the possibilities to grow into being, even more than it already is. As a child, it was the library and the bookmobile that were available to me as a brown girl growing up in rural North Carolina. And books were my world. But I did not see myself often in those books. It really was my family. My mom's siblings are all educators, and it was their libraries that taught me about myself, that taught me about George Washington Carver, that taught me about Wilma Rudolph, Martin Luther King Jr. The library is so essential to our well-being. And when we talk about accessibility, we all know that low-wealth communities, which does not translate into communities of color, but low-wealth communities, regardless of who they are, and communities of color are oftentimes disenfranchised from process and from access. So to have a structure like Liberation Bookstore where children can actually go touch and feel and experience the magic of books is very, very important. And especially, I've seen footage of children interacting with Victoria and with the book station. That's very important, to be able to not just read about what they're going to read, but to actually go and touch it and feel it and be up close and personal with it. It also means that when these young children see themselves in other books, that they actually might think about writing their own stories. And I think that's very, very fascinating. And in working with young children always impress me with the power of imagination and the power of, there are no limitations. They don't have boundaries, they soar. And venues like Liberation Bookstore are the vehicles that make them soar, that help them soar higher. It's one thing when people have your book. It's another thing when they can actually look at the book cover and look at you and understand, oh, these are her words. These are her stories. So the power of story is very, very important. And we don't think about our own stories. We think about the stories that we read about. We think about the stories inside of books. But for me, as a public speaker, as someone who truly believes that we're all human museums, the bookstores like Liberation station is just one other way of helping people go and find themselves inside of their own museums. And Victoria's most recent book about the museum, I think, really actualizes what I'm talking about. Is we're all human museums, and we have stories. And I think when people see people like Victoria, when young children see people like me, and I always tell children there's nothing magical or important or special about me. If I can do this, you can do this. And that's what's really at the core of doing this work, doing the public work, is helping young people understand that they are worthy of their own stories, to be able to see them and read them or dance them or sing them into being. So that's why I have such high praises for the work of Liberation Station. Well, it's been interesting and fascinating to see her trajectory. And Victoria is all over the place, but she somehow has a magical way of streamlining and remaining at the core. And at the core is having available to children stories where they see themselves and where they can see beyond themselves. So her trajectory, I think, is a very good model for someone who's thinking about becoming a small business owner, someone who's thinking about meshing the literary arts and literacy with movement and dance, because I know that she collaborates with other people. And more importantly, the fact that she's documenting this process. Documenting the process. As a documentarian, I value the private and secondary sources that inform the work. And I think that Victoria has done a really good job of connecting the dots for other people and being very upfront and personal and open and vulnerable to talk about. And these will be some of the pitfalls. These will be some of the mistakes. These are the things you might not want to do. When we're able to help other people step into a space of success. The power of literacy in our communities is so important. If we can excite children about reading at a very young age and exciting them about what it means to be educated, what it means to be informed, what it means to have a public presence, what it means to be able to tell your own story and to not allow anyone to disavow that story or to disenfranchise that story. I think that's what sets them apart. It's not just a brick and mortar bookstore, but it's a living sensibility. It's a living presence itself that allows and invites people inside. And I think that's the magic that we need more of. What is the human museum of your community? Not just your person, but what is the human museum of your neighborhood? Because it too has a museum. What are the things that keep us? What are the stories that we celebrate over and over again? What are some of the things that disappoint us about our communities? But when we have the power to remember, the power of memory, and when we have the power to invite ourselves to actually gather, to document, to write those stories, it matters. So it's very important that people like Victoria in this position use their voice, use her art forms, use all the tools available to her through this business to help others understand that there are many, many different ways to be educated. And it's not always in a classroom. But I think spaces like Liberation Station is a place, and it gives people a location where they can gather and feel safe and celebrate it. And invite it to not just read the stories, but to think beyond the stories. What are the stories yet to be told? What are the stories that Langston might write? That the world is changing as we speak, as I just spoke those words. They don't mean anything anymore. We have to be careful to not denigrate ourselves. We have to be careful to not buy into the stories that are made up about us that don't serve us. And I strongly believe that when the table isn't large enough, we just build a bigger table. So I'm always at the essence of the work I do. It's like How many people can I gather in the name of liberation? How many people can I gather in the name of saving our humanity, saving our planet, making a better world for our children? And I think when you keep these tenets at the core of the work that you're doing, respectability and accountability, and being non-judgmental about the people that will gather in your spaces, I think that when we can reach beyond all of the things that separate us, that we can build this bridge around the commonalities and the common threads of goodness that connect us. And that's my dream for Liberation Station going forth. It's my dream for myself going forth, is how do we bring more people to the table?